Hello everyone, how are you doing today? I hope you're enjoying your week so far because we're going to be doing something a bit educational today. Today we are going to be doing part 1 of the walkthrough for the Skyrim Dragonborn theme we did a couple weeks ago. Now this is going to be part 1, part 2 is going to be coming out in a couple weeks, and today we're going to be focusing on the orchestration and song progression of this particular piece. What are the bricks and bones of it? How does the song progress to give you certain feels? Why was the instrument choice so fundamental to how the sound came out? Now, before we do any of that, I recommend you go back and listen to the redo I released on this track a couple weeks ago, which you can find in the description. You can also go out and listen to the original, which I referenced, which you can also find in the description. After you've listened to those, come back here, and now we can start our lesson. Now, this particular piece was a very, very choir-heavy piece. And choir was taking up the forefront of a lot of our main themes, which we will discuss more about later. It also had a very big focus on brass, and before we even listen to the track, we know these two things about it. And what do these two things do? Well, they tell us that they wanted possibly more of a heroic theme with a brass and choir team up, and that they might have also wanted a much more larger epic theme, considering that when you listen to the original, the choir in it is very large. It is a humongous choir when you're listening to it. It sounds very big. Of course, they don't get the choir in right away, so let's see how they start this track and understand how they progress to that huge sound that we hear and that amazing theme. So we have a very standard intro for what you might think about a lot of orchestral music. You have some drums and some low percussion kind of introducing you to a bass line rhythm, and you have a pedal note in the strings. Now, of course, you have those little choir shouts that come in, but for the most part, the choir still isn't really all there. It's still mostly focused on just percussion and that pedal note, which focuses keeping the song progressing and building up as they then later introduce the brass and the more longer sustained choir notes and the woodwinds underlying beneath. Now, this song was notated and written out in the key of D major or B minor. However, going off the beginning here, you can see they're obviously taking that more B minor focus, as the pedal notes and even the percussion all focus around this B home note. And as they get into that section where they're starting to build it up more and they're bringing in the brass and stuff, they add another octave of that B note in for the pedal note, and they start bringing in some of the harmonics here. So right there is the introduction to the main theme for our track. It's the very first time we hear sort of any main thematic piece, so that would be our main theme for the track. And they hop into it pretty much right from the intro, and anyone who listens to this song knows this particular part of the song. However, what makes it so powerful and impactful? Well, one thing when we look at it is the rhythm. In terms of orchestration and progression in the song, pretty much everything in this main theme area shares that same rhythm when you listen to it. Of course, in the case of the high strings and a couple other of the high note instruments, they actually embellished a little bit more and add in a couple extra bits. However, if you listen to the low end on our timpani, you can hear the distinct rhythm of the section very well, and that rhythm guides everything else for this main theme. After that, it's simply a matter of figuring out what sort of main melody line you're going to focus on and the chords you're going to center it around. And in both cases, the choir takes over both of those lines. The choir in this piece is extremely powerful in driving that main theme forward, with everything else kind of just centering around it. Now, coming out of the main theme can be really hard for a lot of composers if you went from an intro like that into a big main theme like that. It's very hard to make your music dynamic if you're just jumping to the loudest point right away, but there's actually a really simple solution which they implemented very well here. And it's just take it down a notch, just take it down a little bit. They had a big sort of rise up as they were leaving their main theme, which you can see here by all these rising notes. We have many, many runs up. And then they actually bring it back to pedal notes and some brass ostinato patterns, which you can see here. They're descending and ascending at the same time, giving you that counter movement that they want, bringing in that harmony as well. We have here your home note starting off with B, D, F. It's a home power note. And you also have E, G, B, and then you have sort of 7th and 9th progressions after that. They're bringing in that dissonance afterwards while also bringing it down and having that sort of ascending brass line, which implies heroism after their big epic main theme. So they went from extremely epic to more romantic and heroic. And now after that, after they've introduced that sort of heroic brass lead, they've actually removed it and gone back to that epic choir, but they've changed it up a bit. Right now, where that choir's playing, there's not really any sort of thematic bits. It's sort of a no man's area. What purpose does this serve, you may ask? Well, coming out of thematic bits, it's kind of hard to just keep themes going on continually. Putting in a piece where it's sort of rhythmic and harmonic based and doesn't really have much of a theme to it will help your song progress, especially if they include such strong rhythm, such as they do here with the choir and the percussion. And then coming out of that, they actually do something very interesting to transition this piece of music away from all the big and bombastic stuff. After this section, there's actually a really soft soprano choir section where it's just high notes with a little bit of embellishments here and there, which you can see over here. And they do this amazing transition section here, which I like to refer to as like a bit of a march or a bit of an explosive release of energy. So coming out of this part where you have that choir build, it goes into this. Notice that's only a small 4-bar section, but it holds so much power over the rest of the track. Even though they took out so much of the high end here by taking out things like flutes, high strings, whatever, and they just brought it back down to the brass and the choir. Doing something like this is a great transition of energy if you know how to do it. And in fact, they do it a lot here. They have build up and then drop down, and then they have a build up and then they have a drop down, and even further on they have builds up and then drops down. So doing something like this will help transition your energy, especially if you're going to a softer section. You don't want to just go right away from a really heavy section to a softer section. A transitional area in between where you write in just a little bit of something that sounds like it fits, something that will push the audience forward with listening and push your theme forward as well, will greatly help the transition as you're moving forward. What's also interesting about this section is this could be considered the B theme of this piece. It is very thematic, it has a very strong melody line. It also takes out a lot of the strong components of the piece. There's no brass, there's no choir, you've stripped that all down, and you've just put in this very, very soft soprano voice. It's not the whole choir, it's just a little bit of that high end, and you have these low end chants that are super low down and just push your rhythm forward. After that, they bring in this powerful flowing French horn again and reintroduce your brass to get this piece moving with its momentum again. They don't want to stay too soft for too long because then all of a sudden the piece transitions into something that you don't necessarily want it to be. You want this to be a very large epic piece, and if you keep it in the soft area for too long, your audience will start to get a little disinterested. Now this next section they go into, you can see they bring back a lot of those pedal notes, and that's because they're transitioning out of sort of their B theme and they're trying to come back to their main theme of the song, which they go into shortly right over here. But again, you don't want a thematic bridge between two themes. If you put in a big thematic bridge and you have another huge theme in between two already powerful themes, it will weaken the strength of both the first theme that you heard and the second theme, and all of a sudden you have three themes. Everyone's just a little confused. And in terms of orchestration, they bring back that very powerful brass, and they bring back all of the high strings and the mid strings as well as the winds. You can even hear as you're going through that, there's no thematic bits. There's progressions like those ostinato patterns in the trumpets and that kind of marching theme in the low strings and the low brass. However, there's no soaring theme. There's no rhythmic theme really. It's just pedal notes filling out a bit of harmony and focusing around that B note here. And now they come back to the big section of the song. They come back to that huge main theme. Now, it can be hard as well to get the main theme when it's repeated to sound just as interesting as when you heard it the first time. Well, the first time they played this main theme through, they only played through a part of it. They didn't play through the actual whole thing. We hear the actual whole theme in this second playthrough. They also did not use all the instruments available to them. And they added those back in for the second one so that they could really push the track forward, add that power. Instead of only using 2/3 of the orchestra for the first one, they're using all of it. So they play through this extremely powerful main theme section. And for people wondering about how the orchestration's laid out specifically, like why are these chords like this? Why are they like this? It can all be broken down into the most simplistic terms possible. As you can see, as they're starting to get into this huge, big, powerful section, it's all block chords. It's all bar-long blocked chords. It's not anything super intricate. They don't start to shake the rhythm up for it a bit until they introduce the sort of more rhythmic section of it over here, where you have that choir pushing through and forcing that rhythmic harmony and that rhythmic melody onto you. And even when they do that, you can see there's still a lot of block chords here. It's a little bit more flourish to them and a little bit more rhythm in the high end. Of course, this really big bridge in the middle where they do this huge descending line just really helps tie in the two parts of their main theme as well. If you listen to it, you know that there's a transition of power happening because you're all of a sudden up really, really high with your main theme, and now you're walking it all down to crash down into a more powerful section just a little bit lower. And then after they finish through their big bombastic main theme playthrough part 2, they go back into this sort of marching theme where they do that transition of power back into those softer sopranos then. Rinse and repeat. And if that isn't a majestic finish, I don't know what is. They use that huge marching transition bit with the horns and the shouts to transition back down into your low energy section, marking the end of the track. Now, finishing a track can in some ways be much harder than starting it. When you're starting it, you have all these ideas in your head, you're molding them, you're shaping them, and you're making a firm idea of what you want this track to be. When you're finishing it, you're restricted sort of to that idea that you've already created. However, that doesn't mean it needs to be big and overly complicated. A very simple outro such as this can work very, very well. They added in a sort of melody with the brass here going up and then descending down, and they stripped out a lot of the harmony until the very end where they just held it out with some very soft progressions, and they built out the harmony just a little bit before breaking it all down to just a couple timpani hits. In terms of progression, doing an outro like this could fit any track that you're working on. You could go from any sort of theme and break it down, break out of it, do your sort of transition into a much softer area with just like some held out long notes, and in my opinion, that's a perfect way to end a lot of tracks. Of course, there are a lot of other creative ways. However, as we can see, it is a great idea. It sounds amazing. Now, next week, we're going to be going over how they built out their two main themes, and we're going to be focusing more on writing out a theme similar to this and breaking down how this one was written. Of course, before then, I highly recommend downloading the MIDI that I've linked below so that you can import it into your own session, study it and learn from it, and maybe try your own hand at a recreation. I say this with every recreation walkthrough video. I'm going to say it again. It's one of the best ways to improve your musical writing. Study other people's music. It's a great tool, and a lot of times you can get it for free. My cat agrees. You should agree too. So without further ado, I will see you guys next week for our next Audio Tools Explained, and then we'll do part 2 in a couple weeks. So enjoy the rest of your evening, guys. Have a good night.